When the VAR comes into football, surely the decision is reversed. Here is Ronaldo playing against Bayern Munich in the quarter-final. You can see there, clearly offside. The ball comes through to him and he scores, and it's a critical goal. And actually, it doesn't happen once, it happens twice. Here he is again. Now, that's a very marginal offside. You can see he is ahead of the ball. Robbie, we look at these and we think it can't come in quick enough, can it? Because here's two fairly straightforward offside decisions with VAR would be reversed, because afterwards Bayern Munich said, Thomas Müller said it was like playing 10 against 14. We were robbed effectively.
I think it's got to come in, but just for the black or white incidents. That's black or white. He's onside or offside. Now listen to Craig there. In rugby, they take it back. I don't know how many phases, forward pass, is it interference, wherever it is. I think in football it has to be black or white. The offside, yes, he was offside. You can clearly see that. I think the goal line technology has been great, but for when it's a human decision, like a penalty, I think you can't bring it in for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. When it's subjective, like penalty decisions or tackles, I think it's going to be a difficult one. Essentially, it's the same thing. You go upstairs and a referee will make a call and, may see it differently.
Maka, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's easy enough to make the decision. There was a sending off in that game as well, 2 yellow cards for Arturo Vidal, which wasn't, was it? That was a perfectly timed tackle, certainly his second yellow card, and that can be cleared off. In the first replay, it takes 10 seconds, and I think that's what everybody's scared about when it comes to VAR, aren't we? Everybody's worried about how long it'll take. Yeah. Are we going to be stationary for a minute, 2 minutes? These decisions are 10 minutes.
It's very difficult when it has a detrimental effect on the outcome, though. I mean, Manchester City had a perfectly decent goal disallowed against Arsenal in the FA Cup semi-final. Arsenal then go on and win the game. Had they gone 1-0 up, would have maybe possibly changed the outcome of the game.
But that's a line call, so yeah. I agree with that. But there's also in terms of the game itself, there's natural breaks in rugby. The ball is out of play for a long time. Scrummaging takes up such a big part of the game. I think I was reading it's 20% of the game for stoppages, which is, unbelievable.
You have had incidents, haven't you, in rugby where you thought, or there have been times you think, there are too many referrals to the TMO and it's taking too long?
Rugby's had to learn how to use the TMO, and it's done all of it on the job, lads, hasn't it? So when it came in, first of all, there were constant stoppages, and the crowd were booing every time it came up on the screen, and it had to learn from its mistakes on that front. I think it's found a bit of a balance. The point is, it does exist. So if there's any doubt, they kind of have to go to it.
And interesting, what rugby's trying to do is not take the control completely away from the referee, allow the referee to make a decision in the spur of the moment, and then if the TMO can't disprove that, then it goes back to the referee's on-field decision and he goes ahead.
Do you think the referee in rugby goes to the TMO too much? Because I watch a lot of rugby and think, they seem to go all the time.
I think the problem is, if it's there, and football doesn't have it yet, but if it is there, the referee knows that the outcome of this decision could decide the game. He's going to go upstairs, isn't he?
And ever influenced by the crowd?
Massively, massively. And a lot of it boils down to the referee. Inexperienced referees will probably rely on that more than a Nigel Owens or a Wayne Barnes, who are confident in their decision making.
We always wonder whether they're influenced by the commentary, because you say, "Oh, we might want to have another look at that." Yeah. They say they're not. They say that
really? They can hear what you say.
They say that they turn it off. Right. I'm not sure that they do all the time.
No one turns Lawrence off.
Did they turn us off, lads?
The point is you make. I'm just thinking about the subjective calls. So particularly now, I shoot at goal. You're 10 yards away from me. You're in the penalty area. You lean into it. Have you got time to get your arm out of the way as a defender? Is your arm in an unnatural position? That's where it's going to be so hard in football.
I think
you can go up to the VAR and, the on-field referee may not give a penalty. The guy upstairs may think it is a penalty, or vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Or sending the off's the same. Sometimes we think that's a perfectly legal foul when he's won the ball first and cleared the man out. Yeah. Other people think it's a bad tackle, it's a red card, and I think that's where it gets subjective. All we do then, the referee just goes, well, I'm not sure. As Chris said, sends it up to one man who sits upstairs, and he's not really sure. And he probably hasn't played the game, or he has played the game, depending on what rules.
So you're saying keep that level of, from the referees on-field decisions. Otherwise, you might as well have a robot.
A tackle on the field. If it's if it's a tackle or a foul or whatever. If it's a foul and he doesn't give it, and it's somehow 30 seconds later ends up in the back of the net, that's just something we have to live with.
I think World Rugby, who are essentially the guardians of the game across the world, would much rather that all happened on the pitch. They don't really want to use the TMO. In fact, I think they're actively looking at trying to make the rules a little bit simpler. So it's just as easier for everyone at the moment to kind of garner what's going on.
That's a big job to make the laws.
It certainly is, yeah.
Why don't you just talk us through what the viewers can see as well, which is the camera perched upon the chest of the referee?
Yeah, you'll often see Wayne Barnes with a big chest. Trust me, he doesn't have a big chest. He has this kind of harness across him with a little point of view camera on it. So you get these amazing shots right in the thick of the action. And it's something that I guess if you haven't played rugby, you'll never have sensed this, the fear, the physicality of it all. It's not necessarily for decisions. It's more just for viewer experience, isn't it, Andy?
Makes it tumble there.
Yeah, that's just to augment the viewer experience, isn't it? To give you some sort of sense of what it's like.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, both football and rugby are trying to push the boundaries of technology to make it a better experience if you know, either the live experience or the one, you know, back at home in the armchair.
Yeah.
But a lot of rugby is so in tight, you don't really know what's going on. You know, football, I guess that's the beauty of it. These lovely breaks, flowing passes. And rugby, a lot of it's just happening in this kind of mill in the middle of the pitch, so it needs help.
I think I like that, and I'd like that to come into football. And I also like the fact referees have to explain their decision. So even though you might not agree with that decision, you understand what they are seeing from their point of view.
You also hear what they're saying, and I think that's a big difference in the two games. You know, a few years ago, or many years ago, they introduced RefLink. You know, as you can go and buy put it in the ear, and you can hear it. And I think in rugby you need that because you need the laws explained to you. Why was that penalty given? Because I couldn't see it. But you also hear in the interaction between player and referee, which is obviously very different.
There's no need for a referee in a rugby game then after the final whistle to come out and speak because you've heard it all on the field. In football, we're trying to say we wish referees would come out after the game and explain why they get the decision, but they don't.
Let's hear a couple of examples.
Sorry, that wouldn't interest me whatsoever, seeing a referee in the Premier League run around with a camera on. No, why?
Well, you played the game, but for those of us who haven't, it'd be quite interesting to see the speed of the game. As Craig says, the counter-attacks in football can be lightning in the Premier League.
A lot of the time, though, the referee's so far behind, 20 feet. I wouldn't worry about me.
Microphones have worked, though. Wouldn't you reckon to microphones?
Possibly, yeah, but to understand his decision-making, yeah, I think that would be good for the normal viewer.
Well, get rid of dissent.
Let's give people an example then.
That's the big problem. The dissent's the big problem.
Let's give people an example of what we're talking about here. So this is the ref mic'd up in a Premiership game.
Get up or stop the game. Get up.
Right, listen. No, I'm going to speak to you first because he clearly doesn't understand. I spoke to him at that scrum. If he speaks to me again like he's just done, I'm going to send you from the field of play. Do you understand? Thank you.
See, Andy, that's brilliant. No ambiguity, Billy Vunipola, is it? You speak to me like that again, I'll send you off. I don't care who you are, you're an England player and all that. You speak to me again like that, you're off.
Yeah, I mean, that's a respect thing as well. I think a lot of it came in when Lawrence stopped playing because of the way he spoke to referees.
I always found it easier if I refereed.
We'll get on to that, Lawrence, don't worry.
You can hear everything that's going on. A lot of rugby players, as soon as the referee brings a player over, there's nothing at all going back to the ref, and it's all respectful, and they're the boss.
It's interesting. The consequences of him, getting sent off might have been that he misses, next few games or misses a Lions tour, etc. So you've got to accept that and behave.
That is one of the I think it's best uses is to keep them honest. You look at Dylan Hartley in the Premiership final a few years ago. He said something to a referee. I won't repeat it on air now. It wasn't nice, and he missed a Lions tour because of it. You know, we thought he wouldn't do that again, but he's had a few incidents since. But for the most part, the players learn for that. It keeps them honest.
I think that's the big. That is the big thing, isn't it? The dissent in football is the big thing. You know, we can see, players surrounding referees' decisions. We can lip read a lot of the time of what players are saying, and until the referees start sending people off, it'll continue to happen. If you know you can get away with that, well, you'll carry on doing that, of course.
This is a serious question. Are they swearing at him, Steve, more often than not, or are they just effing and jeffing in general? Or quite often do you swear directly at the referee?
I think a lot of this is just pure frustration, isn't it, a lot of the time? So they're probably just effing and blind and out.
So no one in particular, as it were?
Absolutely, but of course there's bound to be occasions where the referee is getting particularly swore at, definitely.
There has to be a line, and the players have crossed the line there. In rugby, that wouldn't happen, so rugby get that right.
Yeah, definitely.
Rugby get that right, Robbie. Can't deny that, can you?
No, I agree, but, is that an educational thing?
What that shows is it's OK to challenge authority. Yeah. And, for people who are watching that, they're thinking it's OK to challenge authority. And I think that's where there is an issue that football has made significant strides in recent years. It's got a lot better, but I think it could still move.
That is not.
What do you say to the ref there, Chris? Happy Christmas.
Well, that was a Scottish ref, and he got that one wrong.
But that's not the point.
But I think if the referees go round at the beginning of July in pre-season and just say, any dissent, we are sending you all off. And then on the first game of the season, if he sends them off, all he has to do is they've been told, every club has had the referee go round, they've been told, and just start sending people off.
And it would stop because it's individual responsibility there.
Because we've seen it with The shirt pulling start of the season, the corners, the
Yeah,
law was brought.
it's a different thing, though, isn't it?
That's a different thing, yeah.
It's very simple.
but I think
because that law was brought. Any shirt pulling from corners, we're going to give penalties. We started giving the start of the season, then they don't give them anymore.
Yeah,
If we could hear, do you remember the famous one about 25 years ago when Arsenal didn't realise that David Eder had been mic'd up at Millwall? They only discovered at half-time, by the way, been mic'd up, which was a bit of a shock. You know, when we watch that at home, we're like, well, we suspected it, but now we really know what the industrial language is like.
You can see, of course. You can.
I mean, on the flip side of that, there's some quite amusing conversations between player and official as well. I mean, certainly we see that in rugby. I mean, Nigel
the
Owens...
famous one about, was it Scott Quinnell who used to call the referee Sir?
Yeah.
That's what a lot of rugby... Yeah, a lot of we all call him Sir, just trying to get him in your pocket.
Yeah, they said it on that clip, didn't they? Before they said it on the clip.
I think the other thing is, in rugby, it's led by the director of rugby, so like the manager.
Yeah.
And he referees come in and say, none of that, it's led by the manager. I think what Maka was saying there, if the referees go in and the managers are all in agreement,
quickly come to football's defence. Just quickly come to... A, my sons under 10s don't talk to the referee like that, so I don't know where that behaviour is learned. B, in rugby, right, if Robbie annoys you on the pitch, you don't have to shout it at the referee. Next time he has the ball, you're going to smash him. And, you know, you get to... In rugby, you get to release those frustrations through the physicality of the game. In football, you don't. You don't really get to do that. So you might get tense in rugby, but there's a scrum, there's a tackle, and it
but in
disappears.
football, if you do that in football, you're on the back page of every paper for hitting somebody. In rugby, you get away with it. But it's okay in rugby.
Footballers...
Legal tackle.
But
legal tackle.
No. Legal tackle, just a strong...
Legal tackle.
You've got the ball.
Footballers can influence referees, chipping away at them. If there's a foul given against you, come on, you know, just give me one. I used to do it. We all used to do it. You chip away at the referee. I mean, you know, talk about Lawrence refereeing games. You try and put the seed of doubt in the referee's game. So with rugby, they have that right now. Yeah.
Well, before we go to the break, some of the best refs in the last 20 years. You, Matt Dawson, Richie McCall, the New Zealand captain, the best referee that's ever lived.
I think you can influence the referee, but you've got to be proactive. You've got to work with him. No referees are live on TV. They don't want everyone at home to see you shouting at them in front of the world. But as you're running towards the line-out, you can have a little quiet word in their ear, they can have a quiet word in your ear. That's what I would call proactive management.
Proactive management, you heard it now. Time for a break, but if you're watching our social media, keep watching as Jules will have your feedback from the debate. Everyone else, don't go away. We'll continue our rugby and football debate in a moment, and coming next we'll be discussing should rugby be simplified to widen its appeal, club against country, and should crowds be segregated as well. Back in a moment.
So, as you know, we've been asking you to get in touch on social media, and you've actually raised some really interesting talking points on the football versus rugby debate. First of all, Paul Weaver on Twitter says, #rugby wins, treat the fans with respect, no segregation, which is something the guys are going to talk about in a moment, no limited ticket allocation for away fans either, and beer at your seat. That would never work in football. Also, Ultra Submarines got in touch on Twitter and said, I'm a football fan, and football doesn't mess about with gimmicks like TMO, sin bins and bonus points. He thinks that those things diminish the game. But what seems to have got you all really fired up and talking on social media is the supposed issue of elitism in rugby. This one from James ASM on Twitter. He says, elitist? In the past, possibly, but rugby is so much cheaper, it's family-friendly and it's more accessible compared to football. MUFC News says, not really sure myself about the elitist versus working class argument. Loads of working class watch and play rugby union these days. Hilton Hurst on Twitter is seeing the funny side of things, though. He says, how is rugby working class when the stadium has a fromagerie? And finally, Ultra Submarines on Twitter says, I'm a season ticket holder, this is interesting, at both Leicester City Football Club and Leicester Tigers. Many are working class rugby fans, but there are also many posh football fans, which is a fair point to bring up. Now, another thing that you're all talking about on social media is the issue of respect, as the guys have just discussed. Amelia Rose says footballers must learn to respect that what the referee says goes, no arguments. Pat Adams also tweeted saying, as much as I love football, the rugby players have got so much more respect for the officials and footballers need to watch and learn. Now, I'm sure most of us will know about the 2009 European Cup incident with Tom Williams and the blood capsule, and football fans have been getting in touch. They're arguing that if this can happen in the game of rugby, how can the players have respect for the officials and for their teammates too? Neil Jennings was quick to pick up on this on Twitter, mentioning blood capsules and the fact that rugby players also intentionally go out to hurt the opposing team. Now, sticking with the issue of respect for officials and teammates, Ben Kay wrote a really interesting article in The Times earlier on this week, pointing out the issue of diving and theatrics in football. He said, this is the biggest problem in football, and the sport should long ago have brought in citing commissioners. He says, I wish football had been strict in dealing with this because it's an ugly scar on the so-called beautiful game. When players feign injury, they're showing a lack of respect for their opponent and for the game as well. And on Facebook, Matt Hardy rounds things up by saying, I think football can actually learn a lot about respect, and I think rugby can learn a lot about everything off the pitch. In most but not all grounds, atmosphere tends to be better at football games, and I think both can learn from each other. So keep getting your thoughts in. You can tweet us or use the hashtag BTSportScore on Twitter.
Welcome back to The Score. Headlines so far today. Manchester City lead Crystal Palace 5-0 at the Etihad, and Tranmere have made it to Wembley for the National League playoff final.
Come on, Tranmere.
Tranmere back at Wembley. And on the last day of the Viva Premiership season, there are some big games later at the Rico, where Wasps play Saracens, and at Franklin's Gardens as Northampton host Harlequins. On we get then with rugby and football debate.
Yeah, I mean, rugby, I think the one lesson it can really learn, many lessons it can learn from football, let's be honest, they should be sharing ideas, is football's incredible growth, particularly with the Premier League, which has been such a fantastic worldwide success. And there's no doubt about it, the Aviva Premiership would love to follow that. And they actually see themselves in that kind of terrain. They see themselves as the biggest domestic league in the world. But what they feel they probably need to do to help with that is to simplify the rules, because they are incredibly difficult. And rugby also has to react to changes in the game. It has to react to concerns from parents and mothers who don't want to see their little fella get injured. And you'll often see that season by season, won't you, lads? I mean, particularly this season with some of the high tackle stuff, that's a reaction to safety concerns, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And also the size of the guys now. I mean, Lawrence is pretty big, but these guys that are coming through, they're doing weights a lot earlier. They're bigger and more powerful, so the physical impacts are huge as well. So looking at lowering the tackle height, which prevents serious injuries, and yeah, that's the way forward.
So that's all sensible stuff. I just wonder, from your guys' perspective, you're watching so much football, does the difficulty, the complication of the rules stop you watching it?
Yeah, I think so. You know, my little boy, the school he goes to, they play rugby, and when I go and watch him, I've no idea what's going on, because I've got no referee.
Yeah. Some people would argue
in football as well.
I was waiting for that.
Good point.
Waiting for that.
You walked straight into that one.
Yeah. But I've no idea, you know, about anything.
So with televised rugby, when you guys are explaining it, we understand it. But watching a park game, it's as clear as mud, the rules.
And I'll tell you which... I think I'm normally OK with the rugby when I watch it. The scrum area, of course, is difficult, but then when you get a game like the England-Scotland game, where they were stepping forward and the ball, that just, you know, completely baffled me until I read.
England-Italy game.
England baffled all of us. Yeah. Well, exactly. So you're watching
England players in the same boat.
Well, that's so when you get that, when even, you know, the lawmakers has got everybody confused, and you can hear people disagreeing and picking up the newspaper the next day. You know, people of high esteem were virtually arguing each other. You pick this paper up and thought, oh, this, you know, they were tactical geniuses, and then you pick this paper up and it's an absolute disgrace to rugby. I think that's what confused me when I watched it.
And I think rugby, you know, tries to make the rules a bit more, it's tried to simplify the rules and speed the game up. But in football, it's much more black and white, and it's not down to necessarily the interpretation of the referee. Whereas in rugby, it is much more around the interpretation of the referee, because one side will say, well, he's holding on to the ball, and the other side will say he's not. So the referee has a huge impact in every single decision on a rugby field.
TMO's cleaned rugby up as well, because rugby, you know, let's get it right, sort of 20, 30 years ago, just used to be a big punch-up. It was like going down the pub the other way around. 12 pints you'd have in the pub and then a punch-up afterwards. Rugby was have the punch-up first and then 12 pints after.
Correct.
So TMO has cleared it up, hasn't it?
There's still a bit of that, though, isn't there?
That's unfair. They'd never drink 12 pints. Like 10 minutes. You know.
Silly question. Is the rules of rugby straight across the board, all across the world, exactly the same.
Yes.
In the Super 14s and things like that,
But
it's all the same.
They will trial changes, usually down south. Before they implement
That's
them
what I
up
mean.
north.
Why are there so many changes?
A lot of it's safety. A reaction to safety concerns. A lot of it is due to player size
Well, I think it's
and speeding the game up.
We want to make it a better product. We want more tries scored. You want better games of rugby.
That's a recognition of what a competitive leisure market
Mark,
it is. What about the accusation always levelled at rugby union that it's elitist, it's a public school boys' game?
I think that was a fair accusation many years ago. I mean, it was simple as that. But I think it's done a lot to change that. I think, I mean, rugby's still a international game as opposed to a truly global game. Football is played everywhere, all over the world. Rugby probably is still only played in a certain number of countries, and World Rugby's trying to change that. But this kind of private school versus state school, you know, a lot more state schools are now playing rugby. It's becoming more accessible, more available, and I think that's a good.
You're doing your bit as well, aren't you, with your foundation to try?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you know, naturally, everyone, you know, at school wants to play football, and I think, you know, that. I mean, let's be honest. If all of us could play football, would we have played rugby? I'm not so sure. You know, I mean, genuinely. But I think, you know, now it's becoming much more, you know, widely available right across the board.
It's interesting because, Andy, you've played in nearly every single Premiership club, so you're quite entitled to take a view on this. But it does change geographically as to who plays and who doesn't play and who's interested and who's not interested, isn't it?
It does, and especially it's a game that's played predominantly in the south of England as well. You know, there's only Sale and Newcastle who are in the Premiership once you go past sort of Leicester way. So that's rugby league territory up north mainly, but a lot of it you've got to understand as well, professional rugby is only 21 years old in terms of how long, and trying to develop the game, trying to make changes along the way as well.
But it's interesting, we say, is it elitist? I mean, Wales, it is a religion. It's certainly not elitist in Wales, is it? Quite the opposite.
Well, I live in England, so I wouldn't know about that.
No, but the last time I had a look, you grew up in Wales.
Yeah, but I didn't play rugby. I was in the North Wales.
So is it North and South Wales?
Should know. I mean,
Yeah,
you
but
should know.
there are still some fee-paying schools that you can't play football at.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to change because, you know, when you're picking a school or choosing a school for your son and the school only plays rugby, and as you say, most people want to play football, if that school hasn't got football, for me, that's a big thing.
There was a stat, 61% of the Aviva players are from independent schooling.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, so we say it's not elite, it's not, you know, I agree it, you know, is getting better, but that's quite a damning stat.
I reckon 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have been 80%, wouldn't it? I reckon. So it's growing the game across community schools as well as private schools.
I think Ireland's a really interesting example of this because it's a bit more condensed. You look at like a team like Leinster, the part of the country I'm from, and it was all the private secondary schools, the Blackrock Colleges, the St Michael's. They fed the Leinster team. But actually, they've spread out from Dublin now, and they're tapping into GAA territory. GAA is a summer game, and they're getting those guys in the winter. And you're seeing a completely different makeup of rugby fans, of rugby players, and it's huge in Leinster now because of that. So it does need to have a little look at itself on that.
Can I say, you know, in terms of the referee and the way they speak to Colin Sir, correct me if I'm wrong, is that not an educational point of view? Because as football players, I would suggest the majority of footballers don't go to private school, and the way they're brought up might be slightly different educationally from rugby players because, you know...
Respect's got nothing to do with class, though, right? We respect something like how you brought up.
I'm asking the question. I'm asking the question, but do you know what I mean? It's...
No.
I do. I think it's...
What did you call the referee?
What?
I mean, the nice word.
Our language, the referee, when we were brought up, when we play professional football, is completely different from rugby players.
Yeah, you're only talking about the word sir, I presume, though, aren't you? You just call him a nominal figure, boss, or whatever you wanted to call him, but you just gaffer or whatever. We all have different terms of calling people.
What do they say in Spain? What do they call the ref in Spain? Do you remember?
Arbitro, that's what they call him. They wouldn't necessarily say that. But like the word manager, they call him mister, which is, of course, completely different to what we'd call him. So you've all got your own little colloquialisms that you call the manager, the gaffer,
word maker,
you know, the referee.
Wow.
I mean, it's just whether you say it or not.
So just before we go, about a minute to go, is there one thing you think... all right, let's not VAR, because that's going to come in. Is there one other thing that you think football could learn from rugby?
No, I would like to see rugby, the scrummaging situation sorted out. That's what I would like. You know,
I think rugby would like to.
It's a game within the game. There are little side issues all the time, and it wastes too much time.
Do you know what I'd like to see in rugby? Tribal fans, because segregation. I'd like to do it in France, don't they? Yeah. The away fans go behind.
Get yourself to Gloucester. Get yourself to Leicester. Get yourself to Northampton.
Yeah, but we have been to Twickenham, and everybody's having a pork pie at the back of a Range Rover. And it's all very nice. You know,
that's not English rugby. English rugby is out in the town.
When I've been to watch England Wales, they all sit together, and it's. It's boring.
I think the dissents we need to sort out.
It is.
There's lots to sort out. We could carry on for another hour or so. Thank you. Back with you in a couple of moments' time.